Today's episode of Darkness Radio is brought to you by BetterHelp. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through it all. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Right now, they have a special offer for Darkness Radio listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/DarknessRadio. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp.com/DarknessRadio. Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. Got a good show coming up here for you. We're talking 125th anniversary of Dracula. And we've got a couple of great guests here that we're going to sit down and talk to. Quick notes before we get to our guests. And they're just quick notes at that. We had Karen Anderson on, animal communicator. We have 10 of her books that we're giving away at random. Not going to announce the winners right here and now, but I'm sending emails to everyone who won. So just look for an email from me, and you will see that you won one book or the other. We're just drawing them at random, and you'll be notified if you won a book. If you don't get an email, don't email me and say, did I win a book? Chances are, if you don't get an email, you didn't win. So just assume that you did not win. Other notes, let's see here. Michigan Paracon. We have a link up from yesterday's show for tickets for Michigan Paracon. I know I've had a few emails already from people asking, where can I get tickets for Michigan Paracon? There is a link in yesterday's show. We'll put one up in the link of today's show as well to get those few remaining tickets for Michigan Paracon. People are wanting to know how they can get there, and we're going to get you that link so you can get there, because one of our guests today is going to be there as well. So I'm excited to let you know that as well. So there you go. A couple of notes for you as far as a little bit of business, a little bit of clearing of the cabinet, so to speak, before we get on to today's show. Let's get into today's show, because I'm excited to talk about the 125th anniversary of Dracula, some of the projects that are going on with Dracula. Our guests today are Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. And by the way, it is Chris McAuley's birthday today, and we are making him work on his birthday, which makes us ultimately evil. So sorry for that, Chris. I'll just say that right off the bat. Dacre Stoker is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker and the international best-selling co-author of Dracula the Undead, the official Stoker family-endorsed sequel to Dracula. He's also the co-editor with Elizabeth Miller of the Lost Journal of Bram Stoker, The Dublin Years, released in October of 2018. Dracula, a prequel to Dracula, co-authored with J.D. Barker, was the UK's #1 best-selling hardcore novel in horror and supernatural in 2018, and a top 5 finalist by the Horror Writers Association for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a Novel. Film rights for Dracula have been purchased by Paramount Studios. Dacre's most recent work, Last Days, a short about the end of Bram Stoker's life, recently appeared in Weird Tales magazine in December of 2020. Chris McAuley is a guy I think I could talk to probably for hours. He's an acclaimed comic book writer, artist, and character creator for DC and Marvel. He most recently won an award for the Scottish comic The Langlock Hame in 2019, and his artwork has been featured in the Glasgow Museum of Modern Art. Chris is familiar to fans of Judge Dredd, having been the assistant colorist on several 2000 AD comic strips. He's also inked various Marvel titles such as Hulkverines and also Vampirella. He is the co-author of the Stokerverse, which currently features 6 comic book ranges, several novels, and a board game in production. We'll talk a little bit about that today. He's also a novelist whose reach has included the James Bond franchise and Alien. Chris has also assisted legendary Disney Imagineer Terry Hardin Jackson on the Star Wars franchise as a concept artist for The Mandalorian, and has written several comic book titles with William Shatner. I think Chris probably needs an extra job in there. I don't think he's busy enough. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the Darkness on the Edge of Town Paranormal Radio Show, Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate your time having us on the show.
That is the only time I'll give you the gentleman and both of you at the same time. We'll from now on address both of you individually. First of all, and Dacre, no disrespect here, is it okay if I address Chris first?
Absolutely. Come on, I do it all the time.
As a comic book nerd, I just gotta address Chris real quickly and bow in your general direction. I'm familiar with the name right away before we even got on the line, and just from the email, and so I just have to tip my cap to you. That's all. I know there's quite a bit of work there.
Very kind of you.
So I guess I have to ask you the general question before we even get into the Dracula in the Stokerverse work that we're about to talk to here today. Forgive me for fumbling here. But in all your comic work, I guess I'm wondering, what is your most favorite, or what do you keep coming back to that you love to work on?
It's actually probably Doctor Who.
Yeah, Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's probably the Doctor Who franchise. Yeah, I didn't quite grow up with the franchise. I was born during the Wilderness years,
okay.
So sort of just when Doctor Who was off the air. But yeah, I think it's that. I think I keep coming back to that. I mean, I've worked on the Terminator as well a couple of times, and that. So yeah, I think Doctor Who's been the love.
Do you find the Terminator series particularly frightening? I joke around on the show a lot, especially during our supernatural news segments on Wednesdays, about just the sheer frightening nature of AI. But I probably overdo the hype a little bit. But there is something that plays on our mind about something of our own creation coming back and essentially being our own undoing. Do you find something quite fun to play with in that psyche?
Well, I've got a reputation for writing in a particularly gruesome style, and that's why I was sought out. Studio Canal sought me out for it. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's the relentless nature of the killing machines, and just the whole damn cool nature of it. It's great fun to play with cyborgs. I've written a few things that actually have the Terminators being like having babies and leaving Terminator babies for the Resistance fighters to find, and then of course they're not quite what they seem. So yeah, things like I like that. I like the infiltration. I like playing with the human psyche. I like taking away the safe spaces. Generally in my work, I like taking away people's safe spaces.
Which is a heck of a thing when you're talking about Dracula. There's not far to run when you're talking about Dracula. One of the things that I guess, and we're gonna get back to Dacre here too as well, that I tip my cap to both of you about is we're taking away the sexy Hollywood image of Dracula here. I think we've probably had enough, and I know I want to get back to Dacre here for a second. There was a plan at one point for Paramount to bring back the original monsters and relaunch them one at a time. And we never quite got back around to Dracula. So before we get into the Stokerverse, I want to ask your opinion of, had you seen the plans for what they were going to do with a new version of Dracula, and what your opinion might have been if they had come back around with that?
Well, first of all, answer the first question. No, I had not seen anything.
Okay.
And all your listeners probably know this, but we just have to say it. As authors and creatives like Chris and myself, who the only entree into that world is through an agent, and that agent, who worked with my literary agent to sell the rights to Dracula. There was still this sort of arm's length about, leave it up to me. I know how this works. I know how all these people work. Mm-hmm. Well, you've also got to realize that since these rights were sold in 2018, there's been numerous changes in all the studios, Paramount in particular, regime changes, they say, but also major decisions. That whole idea to bring back the classic monsters, from what people like Chris, who are much more in the know when it comes to movies than I know, It fell flat in its face with the Mummy, I understand,
Yes,
and it just didn't recover. So that's the answer to the first question. I had, no insight. You would think that they would contact somebody in the Stoker family who has a vested interest, who's written a couple of international bestsellers, and say, "Hey, can you give us some ideas of what may be interesting and popular nowadays?" But let's be realistic about it. People within that world, of the Hollywood world, they have their writers, they have their creatives, and only seldomly do they branch out to go to authors who, even when you sell the rights, they don't want anything to do with an author unless you are super powerful and you've got some supernatural powers to get inside their thinking. So that's answer number one. No input whatsoever. What would it have been? Well, Chris and I talk about this a lot. Who would we love to see? And boy, every convention I go to, every time I'm on a podcast with somebody, it's like, who would you really love to play Dracula? And it's really hard to say, because you are absolutely right. At the top of the show, you said some of us are getting tired of the sexy Dracula that has comes like right off of a runway. The Vampire Diaries, True Blood, that very successful in their time. Don't get me wrong; they were appealed to people. The Twilight Saga appealed to people, got people back in the cinemas watching vampires. But it's such a far stray from my great granduncle's work. As Christopher Lee says, nobody has ever filmed it like Bram Stoker wrote it. And that's kind of like Chris and my mantra. And when in our Stokerverses, we're trying to bring back the original Dracula, it's not just his appearance. We know, Tim, that what happened in 1912 when Bram died, what died with him was his persona of Dracula, the way he described him. Mm-hmm. He was resurrected on the stage, first of all, illegally by Prana Films with Count Orlok, and that's a whole nother story. That was closer to the way Bram described the physical look of his Count. But then on stage in 1922 and then on through the 20s, Bela Lugosi made a name for himself, made a name for Dracula, popularized Bram's story that was adapted by Balderston and Dean and Bram's widow as well. And that really helped book sales, and it helped sort of cement Count Dracula, the suave, debonair, Eastern look European aristocrat, into our popular culture. And it never would have happened if those people in charge of those stage plays didn't place that man on stage, Lugosi, because that's what people look for in those days, an attractive looking monster, not something on stage that was really disgusting and gross and had hairy palms and the way Bram described him. So it works serendipitously that we get something Bram didn't create. We get the story though, and then boom, the movies come out 31. You got Lugosi, and then fast forward for 100 years, and we have everything in the book, with the exception of what Bram created. And that's why at 125 years, Stoker and McAuley create the Stokerverse. In all of the other things that we're creating, you mentioned the show, the board games, the RPG, the computer games, our own stories, our comic books are bringing back Dracula the way Bram described him in physical appearance, but also the guy that he was, that mysterious creature that, Bram didn't give much of a backstory to. But we know from his notes and things deleted from the typescript, we're filling in those blanks with things that we are confident we know that Bram was thinking of. So that's the long-winded answer to your question.
Not at all. Not long-winded at all. Dacre, let me throw this at you and see if I'm hitting the point on the head here, and if you agree with this from a familial standpoint. When you mentioned Lugosi and Lugosi taking up the Dracula role, do you look at that kind of like most Batman fans would look at Adam West taking on the Batman role? Although it did popularize Dracula and bring it to a mainstream audience, does it kind of feel a little campy to you when you watch it? Does it to you when you know what the spirit of Dracula really was?
Well, in a way, yeah. I'm on the fence on this because I have great respect for what Bela Lugosi did. Mm-hmm. He really, there's a symbiotic relationship, that I say between the Lugosis and actually his son and his granddaughter, Lynn. We've been on shows together. Chris and I and her have been on these shows, different horror cons and things. And we admit that he needed Stoker's story to become who he was. Stoker needed his persona to push the stage play, which helped sales of books to, again, cement Bram's creature and his story in popular culture. Was it a little campy? In a way, yes, but really when you've got to think of periodization, what was going on in the theater at the time in 1931, it was the first, horror movie, that I know of, other than Nosferatu, that, kind of became very, very, very popular. Broadway, was out there in New York. It was traveling around the world, and it helped make Florence Stoker, Bram's widow, a good amount of money.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, it was different, but we didn't have a whole lot to compare. I mean, if somebody actually did a proper movie with a Bram Stoker created lookalike, and then along came Lugosi in the Todd Browning film, then we'd have something to compare and contrast. And, I don't like this because he looks, Bram's guy never had a medal on. Bram's guy never wore white. He was all black. But the way it is, now we've got something to start with. And occasionally, people will compare, look, this element of this Dracula that so-and-so put in his movie, either Jack Palance or Christopher Lee or Gary Oldman, Langella. They all have little bits and pieces of what Bram introduced. And I think that's cool because that kind of keeps Bram's legacy alive, but it also leaves the door open for Stoker and McAuley 125 years later to say, okay, we're now bringing back that guy the way nobody has actually done it, the way it should have been done at the beginning, but without being disrespectful for all those other guys that established the Dracula persona, the Dracula character in popular culture.
Very true. When you look, Dacre, when you look at Nosferatu, you have a lot of people in the paranormal supernatural field that, and I'm sure you'll find out when you go to Michigan Paracon, and Dacre is going to be at Michigan Paracon in the end of August. You'll see a lot of people almost are reverent towards Nosferatu, more so than Lugosi's Dracula. You'll see people with keychains, you'll see people with T-shirts, so you'll see people almost with a sort of reverence towards that movie rather than the Lugosi Dracula. Give me your thoughts, if you will, about Nosferatu and how you line it up with Bram's Dracula.
Well, the first thing is, here's a plug for Scream magazine. I'm not sure if you saw the recent edition, but
okay.
I was asked, along with my son, who's a PhD candidate in English literature, and he does a lot of my editing, and I felt strongly, they said, would you guys, we're going to feature Nosferatu, it's the 100th anniversary. Would you guys like to write an article from the Stoker's perspective about what happened, with the rights and so on? And I said, this is great. The first thing I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not going to diss the movie. Mm-hmm. I'm disrespecting to a certain extent the process and the fact that the principals at Prana Film did not approach Florence Stoker. I found no records, and I've done extensive research for 2 years, and I've had the help with a fellow, which is Holder, Folger Holder in Germany, who was a German film historian, to try to find records over there about what happened in the court proceedings. He could find none whatsoever for 2 years. Oh. Luckily, guys like David Skoll has done some research, and I've done some other digging, and bentonfilms.com has done some good digging. So my bone to pick is why they didn't feel it was important to approach Florence Stoker for the rights. And if they had, and there was a big number problem, then that's another story, but apparently they never did. So that sort of bugs me a little bit. The other thing that bugs me a little bit, and I'll get back to what I love about it, was that while she was practically, still, getting her feet back on the ground, Bram didn't leave her a whole lot of money. She was comfortable. Book sales were picking up 10 years after he died, and it was beginning to hit the stage. But also that's when the film came in. Mm-hmm. And what was problematic within her life was, here's a pirated film and I don't have the money to fight it. She went to the Independent Society of Authors and convinced them to mount this legal challenge at their expense, which they did. And she was worried that this film, that it was there was many more copies of the film than people think, oh, just one copy. It was in 6 or 7 different cities in Europe to get screened and looked at, that those were all floating around, and that could hurt her efforts to have a proper licensed product on stage in England and in America. And then also there was copies still floating around in 1930 when she was trying to sell, along with Hamilton Dean, the film rights to the stage play. And luckily, Universal purchased that one copy of Nosferatu floating around in America to get it off the streets. Must have made Florence feel very comfortable that now this is out of the equation, and it's, a pirate version is not going to stop my legal rights to sell the license to this, and they didn't. So that's okay. It was a hassle for her for 5 or 6 years. But now let's talk about the film. It is a fantastic film. There is, as people say, it's a great sign of German expressionism. It was creepy. It had the persona of the Count, much more similar to Bram's. He looked like a rat. Mm-hmm. There was obviously a lot of plague going on in Germany, which they really did, that was brought on by rats, so that it really brought it home sort of in a reality standpoint, which is what, Bram wrote Dracula all about, was creating a supernatural story that felt real, and Nosferatu did sort of the same thing. So I have respect for it, and I'm so glad that at least one copy survived, because it could be remastered. I've got friends that play music to it and show it. I've done talks and panels about it, and of course in Scream Magazine, Parker Stoker and Dacre Stoker write an article about it. So all is well that ends well, and I really think it's pretty neat, and I'm glad it survived.
So that brings me to my next question, which is this. In 2022, we're at the 125th anniversary of Dracula, of course. So why not bring, at the 125th anniversary, why not bring a reimagining of a new project into a film format? Why bring it into a comic format or a graphic novel format?
You got to start somewhere, right?
True. Very true.
I mean, is Chris, and I will deflect this to Chris in a moment without taking his thunder.
Right.
Because we've discussed this like crazy. Mm-hmm. We have thought about, a biopic about Bram. We've thought about a film, and we've had contacts with people to do actually a film on the process of Bram doing his research and writing. And as Chris said, Dacre, if we get this comic done properly, it's like the storyboards are already done. So let me just deflect and let Chris continue with that, Tim, if I may.
Let me build upon that and throw it to Chris. Chris, with and as you can tell, people at home can't tell, but I'm wearing a Captain America shirt. So obviously there's some crossover between comic books and movies these days, and it has been now for the last 10, 15 years, as the strength of comic books being turned into movies has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Do you feel like by taking Dracula and turning it to a comic book that maybe it's an easier avenue to break into a movie?
Well, for me, I have a separation of concerns with all the products that we're looking at. I thought initially the comic books are perfect because, you can do what you want in a comic book without needing a $1 billion budget. Mm-hmm. If you get really talented artists, what you've got is a still frame image that the reader can almost step through the panels and look at. Yep. You get really detailed artwork. You can convey mood and the overall atmosphere and scene within those panels. And it's I think the comic book format's very powerful for that. With no disrespect to Marvel and DC, I think it was the UK that really started that. Alan Moore's work, especially. Mm-hmm. Alan Moore, Alan Grant, those guys that came in that hit the scene hard in the 80s and the 90s, and we're continuing to build on that work. If we take where Marvel and DC have gone with the films. The films are an inferior product compared to the actual source material.
True. Yeah, true.
And that's why starting with a comic book, because what you're doing is you're taking a piece of literature and you're turning it into another piece of literature. Movies are completely different. Yes, this could be the storyboards. There's so much more in a film of that process. So that's going to be its own beast. It's going to be its own animal. But yeah, I mean, comics are obviously very visual, so they could help a film director or producers or a film company to see the potential in the story. But I think when this gets turned into a film, a movie of some kind, that's going to be a different treatment, and that's going to be a very different process. So yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe one can lead into the other, but I take every project as like the separation of concerns that in their own right, what are they, and concentrate on that.
In a follow-up to that, as you're pointing out, comics are a bit of one part story, one part storyboard, as you put everything together and put that story out there, Chris. Here's where I guess I'm not only a little concerned, but I'm a little, my interest is piqued in that, we've pointed out here on the program that Bram Stoker had a very specific vision of what Dracula looked like. Now, I'm sure most of the audience that isn't involved in comics knows that a writer can sit down and say to an artist, I have a vision of what this character looks like. Classic example, Stan Lee sits down and tells Jack Kirby, I have a vision for what Spider-Man looks like. Or sits down with Steve Ditko and says, here's what Spider-Man looks like. And they draw a guy in a red and blue costume with webs. So Bram Stoker says, here's what he looks like. Now, I know it's not you that's doing the art for this, right? You have a different artist that's doing the art for this, correct?
Yeah, we've got a chap called Chris Geary, who's fairly well known in the UK comic book circles. Yeah. So Chris Geary is doing the art for this, and he's read the description, but in his mind, he still has an idea of what Dracula looks like. Now, you sit down, you look at the different sketches and see what it looks like. Does it match what you think Bram would have wanted and what both you and Dacre look at and say, hey, you know what, we're all in agreement. This is pretty much what it looks like in our mind's eye? That's the process that Dacre and I, because we're the advisors. So what we do is we start obviously with the textual description. So Dacre and I provide an artist with a textual description, and then they bring that textual description to life. And that's actually the core of the Stokerverse visually. But we start with that authentic portrayal of Dracula, that physical authentic portrayal of Dracula. Now, we don't stranglehold artists. We don't say that this is exactly how our characters have to look or scenarios, or we give advice. But the core is that this is Stoker's Dracula. This is the Stokerverse Dracula, and this is what it looks like. Because that visual description, it goes hand in hand with how we write the character. Mm-hmm. As you say that we're moving away from the Hollywood archetype, which there's never. I mean, we go back to if you want to go back to the films, they've never been able to shake that. They've never been able to shake that. The closest has been 30 Days a Night. Yeah. And when you look at 30 Days a Night, that's the vampirism that that Stoker was looking at. That the clever spider in the web, incredibly fast, powerful, brutal, extremely violent, capable of extreme violence and extreme intelligence. That to me always struck me that was the core of the vampire, and really why vampires throughout the ages has been quite terrifying. I mean, to be honest, nobody's going to be really scared by the Gary Oldman version, and they're not going to be scared by the Twilight version. And I really liked the Bela Lugosi version, but you'd want to sit down and actually have dinner with him. You wouldn't actually be, because he had that charm, he had that Eastern European charm. But what we're trying to do is, I always say that we're bringing the boogeyman back into the bedroom. And quite literally, whenever you look at that scene with Mina, that's a very horrific scene. There's nothing erotic about it.
Yes.
And, how we've described that, we have an all-star audio drama, Voices of Dracula, and how we actually portrayed that. It's horrific. And that a Dracula plays with people. So...
No, go.
Yeah, I mean, that goes hand in hand with the physical description of Dracula, of the hairs and the palms of the hands, the aquiline face. He's quite visually repulsive. He's quite a visually
Tim,
repulsive character.
If I may add,
Yeah, go ahead.
Chris, you and I, and won't get all the names right of the different artists in our comic Dracula Return, Cult of the White Worm, but we've got an artist that did the core of the story, but we've also had artists do different covers. And in the last month or so, I'll never forget, we got things sent to us, pictures. Chris and I look at it and we say, okay, number one, we got to get some consistency with the other things in the Stokerverse. Now we've got an RPG out there. We've got some miniatures being made with in a different company. Mm-hmm. So we want to have a consistency, but they don't all have to be identical. It just has to be consistent with the way Bram described them in the novel, so that when people pick up a book, a game, listen to an audio story, a comic book, graphic novel in the Stokerverse, we've got this consistency going back to 1897, and people can identify with that. And if they don't identify it, they can start identifying with it, because that's the way that Uncle Bram decided to create it. And we're just keeping this legacy alive in that manner. And the artists seem to really quite enjoy, when we're able to say, hey guys, you're really close, but boy, remember it said the ears are supposed to be pointy. Remember it said the nose is supposed to be aquiline. Remember, just tweak this. And then all of our editors and publishers have been right behind it saying, guys, you're right, absolutely. But can we tweak this little thing? And then, yeah, okay, that's all right. We can play with this a little bit. So we're not really hard to get along with. We're just trying to be the gatekeepers and do it right.
And the artists have their own style as well, so we've allowed that to come through. So we were very lucky to have Hellboy artist Ben Steinbeck for all the variant covers. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that cover, you've got Dracula emerging from a lake of blood. And you've got the pointed ears, and you've got the face, and you've got this glare. And because I'm a student of the occult, you also have a triangle. And that points to something very direct in the Stokerverse and to do with death and resurrection. And then if you look at, there's another variant cover we have from Mike Collins, who actually co-created Gamba.
Okay. Yep.
And we've got this other completely different style of Dracula. But again, you've got the pointed ears, you've got the teeth, you've got the claw, sort of the claw hands, and the beard. Those aspects are all the same, but we allow those artists, because obviously they're some of the most famous comic book artists in the world. We want their styles to come through and blend through. So that's actually the power of comics as well, that you can do that. With a film, you've got your one actor, so you might be able to put on a couple of prosthetics, the way that Gary Oldman did. But you've got the one actor. What we've got here is artists being able to portray Dracula in their style. Authentic, completely authentic, but in their style.
Very true. Before we go to break here, Chris, let me ask you, if you had your druthers and you could pick, let's say, any three artists in the world to draw, let's say, a sequel to Dracula and the Cult of the White Worm, who would you pick, and who would you grab to draw the sequel to this?
I would stick with the same artists.
Yeah,
I'd tell you,
smart man.
I would tell you why, because it's the consistency of the story, and they've got the beats down. They've got the beats down now. If we're looking at another product,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
Well, let's look at another product. Yeah. So, one would be my friend Tom McFarlane. I'd have him. Mm-hmm. I would have him do it. Yeah. I've always loved Spawn.
Yep.
Another pick would probably be Clint Langley. Clint Langley illustrates our Stokerverse RPG, and he's got that real bloody, brutal look down, like really dirty, horrific gothic imagery. So I love that. And somebody who's known a little bit more for writing than artwork, but I quite like Frank Miller's style.
Yeah.
I quite like his black and whites, his noir, because what we do in the Stokerverse is we don't just focus on the Victorian era. We're now starting to push on past that. And could I see his style working for a 1920s Dracula tale? Absolutely. That film noir style would be beautiful for that.
Would you do a project like that? A film noir 1920s, all black and white, if you could get like a Frank Miller to do something like that?
Absolutely. Dracula lives forever. Dracula is in every is everywhere. He's in every time period. And as long as we come up with a convincing enough story, I mean, we are looking at arcs now to World War II and slightly beyond that. So, you know, if you could imagine perhaps some sort of direct detective noir story featuring characters in the Stokerverse, doesn't necessarily have to be Dracula, because we have a wide cast in the Stokerverse. But something like that would really, I mean, you can see, just imagine the hard light, the hard shadows. Yeah. You know, what that would reveal of the characters. It's very, very, Frank's stuff's very, very powerful, and he's got the balls for it. He's got the visceral understanding. You know, his stuff influences my work, my writing. You know, because of that. I find it very, very, very hard to write something that isn't hard edged or isn't visceral or doesn't grab you emotionally in some way. Right. I'm looking for that emotional response, and let me get at that with the comics. It's when you look at the pages, you get an emotional response straight away. David Hitchcock's art, we've got a backup strip there, and David Hitchcock's art is very intricate. It's gothic, but it's grotesque, and it's unsettling. Yeah, which is perfect for a Renfield story. It's unsettling. Yeah, and it disturbs. So, you know, what Dacre and I want to do is we want emotional resonance with every product that we have. So anyway, those are the three that I would pick.
I lied. We're not going to go to break yet, because I do have one more question here for you, Chris, and that is, right now in the major labels are picking up horror comics yet again. It seems like they've kind of had a little bit of a renaissance. But it's more slasher comics, more, you know, they're kind of getting back to the 80s Renaissance type deal. Do you see this Dracula project as being something that could very easily jump to a DC or a Marvel imprint that they're doing? Or even there are a couple of independents that are doing horror labels right now. Is this something that could easily jump to one of those imprints?
I think we're open to working with, you know, many different publishers. You know, every publisher has their strength. Here's why we've gone down the indie route, and it's to do with creator rights. This is something that we all feel very strongly about. Yeah. That, you know, when you go to the larger companies, what sometimes happens is that you have to sign your rights away for a certain period of time, and you'll only get a guaranteed run of maybe a couple of issues. And Dacre and I have, you know, as Stokerverse has proved, we've got, you know, multiple products coming out in various genres. We want to be able to keep the rights to craft the characters in an authentic way, because once you give that over, we can no longer stand and say, this is the authentic vision that Bram has. And DC and Marvel are actually losing ground in the comics arena because of their business models and because of their practices. And that's why guys like McFarlane with Image Comics, they're coming along and they're giving creators complete rights. Yeah. Yep. And that's where we've got to go with comics. We have to respect the creators. They're the guys that are putting their heart and soul into this. So, you know, it should be their property.
And there's some really good stuff coming out on independents as well, some independent labels. I'll tell you what, guys, we're going to take our break here. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about about the new project and see if we can get a little bit of a tease as to the new project and give people a taste of what it's all about. Dracula and the Cult of the White Worm. And we'll do that here in just a second. But first, folks, want to tell you about a time that wasn't so easy for me. And that was, believe it or not, we're talking comics here. And I was out on the road. I was doing radio out in Wisconsin, and I had been absolutely robbed out of my storage unit. And one of those things that got robbed, believe it or not, was about $20,000 worth of comics out of my storage unit. I felt completely just decimated because a lot of my stuff was gone. And I was also going through some other things too. I was going through the end of a relationship. Wasn't getting paid very well. The radio station I was working at, things were kind of falling apart in my life. At that point, I've told you before, I had to do some couch time, as my professor over there in Winona State University would tell me. Tim, once a year, I just go and I do some couch time, is what he would call it. That was his word for therapy. Well, I had to have somebody that I had to talk to. And that's pretty much what I had to do. Well, this podcast, luckily, is sponsored by BetterHelp. And life is full of twists and turns. And it's important to show up for yourself through it all. There's a lot of people that claim they're going to be there for you, and they just aren't. You've got to be there for yourself. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours, which is important, especially when you need to be there for yourself. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you, of course. You're not going to get the right therapist on the first time, but BetterHelp will make it easy and free to change therapist if needed, which is important to you. It's also more affordable than traditional offline therapy. Just go into a regular office and financial aid is available to you. So therapy is now available for you so you can take care of yourself mentally. We talk about how gym memberships are so easily affordable for you. You can just walk into a gym and for a couple bucks a month, you can pump up and get yourself physically fit. Well, now you can get yourself mentally fit because it is overall health, physical, mental, spiritual. You've got to take care of the mental part of health. It's just part of lifestyle. BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself. You can do it right now by a special offer that BetterHelp is offering my listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/darknessradio. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/darknessradio. Folks, let me tell you something. We're all not infallible. We've all got issues. We've all got things going on in our lives that we think we can tackle ourselves. We can't. We need somebody who can be impartial. We need somebody who can sit and listen to us and give us good, healthy choices that maybe we can't come up with on our own. BetterHelp is there to help us. And we can do it right now and make it affordable. Like I said, they've got financial aid available for you. It's less expensive than going to traditional offline therapy, and there's someone available for you within 48 hours. BetterHelp is there for you right now, so go ahead and take advantage of it. Plus, again, they've got a special offer for my listeners. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/darknessradio. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/darknessradio. Go ahead and do it today. We'll be right back with our guests, Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. We're talking Dracula, the 125th anniversary, right here on the best in paranormal podcasting, Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm Tim Dennis. We have got a heck of a show here for you. Hopefully I didn't lose you too much in the little bit of comic book geekdom I got into there with Chris, but you know what? Hey, it's part of the deal. We're talking Dracula, and we're talking the 125th anniversary. We're talking about Dracula and the Cult of the White Worm, which is the way we're going in the second half of the program here. And part of that 125th anniversary, and we're with Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley, who are the creators of the Stokerverse. And one of those projects under the Stokerverse is a comic book / graphic novel called Dracula and the Cult of the White Worm, which has me excited. I got to tell you guys, I'm a huge comic book fan. I'm 52 years old. I've been collecting since I was 5. And this is something that's got me excited. It's something that, as we've been sitting here talking about the concept of getting back to Bram Stoker's original vision for Dracula, I think to myself that the concept is endless for what it is that the two of you have come up with. With that being said, is it possible, and I'll start with you, Chris, is it possible that we can get a little taste of what it is we can look forward to in Dracula and the Cult of the White Worm?
Yes. I have to be careful how much I give away.
Well,
I can tell you, you will learn how Dracula comes back, and Dacre can add to that.
Okay.
And talk about how this is actually possible. You will see the fourth bride. I have to be very careful how I put this, but you will encounter the fourth bride in this.
Okay.
Or the fourth weird sister, more properly called, and you will get a grotesque but grotesquely charming backup strip that was part contributed by Buffyverse author Denise Sietz. So we did bring in somebody from pop culture as well, who wanted to come in and contribute. So you do get, and you have various flavors of artwork. So we've got Chris Geary's artwork for the main strip, and we've got David Hitchcock's then for the backup strip.
Wow!
So you get quite different. You get some different flavors. We've also got a few celebrity introductions as well lined up, and some insights from the Stoker family, courtesy of Dacre, and a couple of illustrated prose-based stories that are going to be placed in there as well from the Stokerverse.
Wow! So, Dacre, I take it this is pretty exciting. You've come out now with this, and you're continuing the story. Is this a way in that you initially saw this? I mean, I know you've put out a couple of different books out there, including a prequel. Was this something that was a little different for you, or is this something that you really, really got pumped for as you saw it coming to life?
Well, I definitely got pumped for it. But the evolution was this, Tim. I did things, sort of backwards, a little bit like the guys in Star Wars. I did the continuation of Dracula with Ian Holt. 25 years after the story ended is when Dracula the Undead takes place. The child that is born of Mina and Jonathan, named after Quincy Morris. Quincy Harker is now 25 years old. So our story starts in 1912. That book came out in 2009, did very, very well. And then the prequel was something that has been in my head for ages, and a lot of research in Bram's life. But what Chris and I have done is sort of take these pieces of the puzzle that I've already started with the prequel, and then discovering the manuscript, or the typescript as it's technically called, of Dracula, which shows that Dracula's guest, Tim, that you've probably heard of, that was published by Bram's widow, was once part of the Dracula story, was once part of the typescript. That's where we get some hints. And I'll just say one of the places where you have an interaction with the fourth bride, the fourth crazy sister, as Chris with weird sisters we talk about. So out of Bram's notes, out of the typescript, out of the 12 years of research that I've done to help me write these two other stories, we have found the opening and the right place to bring Dracula back. And if you give me 2 more minutes, I'll actually
Please.
give justification, because
Yes, please.
one of the things Chris and I recognize, and I've experienced writing these 2 other books with other co-authors, is Dracula purists like to hold authors' feet to the fire. And Chris and I like to be really close, not only in the physical description of the Count, but how the story is laid out. So bear with me, a little bit of a challenge for your listeners here.
Okay.
The original novel Dracula, how did Count Dracula die? Just think about that for about 10 seconds. Not the movie versions. How did he die according to the novel? And the prelude to that is the Band of Heroes is chasing the Count in his liter wagon, being guarded by the gypsies. He's in the crate. They're heading up to Castle Dracula in Transylvania. The sun is going down. The Count's going to get his powers back if the Band of Heroes can't get to him before the sun goes down. Harker and Morris manage to overcome the gypsies. The other Band of Heroes are, with their Winchesters, are holding these guys off. Harker and Morris jump up on top of a leader wagon, open up the crate, and see the Count in there just as the sun is going down. And just in time, Quincy Morris stabs into the chest of the Count his Bowie knife, and Harker slits the Count's throat with his kukri blade, this Indian-type weapon. What happens? The Count gets this look of peace, this smirk on his face, and crumbles into dust. Well, that's not how the story actually ended, because what I've discovered when I was doing my research with J.D. Barker out in Seattle, because Paul Allen is the fellow that owns the Dracula typescript, that right after that happened, what was edited out of the typescript was a volcanic eruption. It was about a page of the typescript with the lines crossed out. And what's really interesting was the cross-referencing that I had done with Bram's notes and a Dutch researcher that had noticed something in the notes that looked like map coordinates. And sure enough, upon analysis, it was. These map coordinates actually placed this location where the final battle took place on an extinct volcano in northeastern Transylvania, just where Bram would have said a story if he was going to have a volcanic eruption. So Tim and listeners, just imagine this. For Stoker and McAuley to come out and say, well, the Count's going to return. Oh, no, he was stabbed with a Bowie knife and he was slit with the throat. And that was it. He crumbled into dust. But wait a sec. Earlier in the novel, when Bram Stoker explained explicitly through Van Helsing, explaining to the Band of Heroes how they're going to have to kill Lucy, it has to be a wooden stake. You have to cut off the head totally and insert garlic. And this is the way to kill a vampire. So, like, we had discussed it on the phone for hours. How can we justify this? It was right in front of us. Somebody, if it was Bram or his editor, took out with the crossed lines of the typescript this definitive ending of the Count with the volcanic eruption. And much like the Count did in other parts of the novel, shape shifted, turned into mist, he could turn into dust. This is the opening we needed. There was no stake in the most crucial battle with the alpha vampire of all time. Was the stake or two lost in the fight with the gypsies? No mention of it, but a Bowie knife was there and just a slit of the throat. So we looked at that and said, okay, what can we do with this? Can we actually justify this? By God, we can. And then, and I won't go into a whole lot more spoilers, but Chris can tell you this. This is where working with an Irishman, a Freemason, as Bram was, we then analyzed one of the books that we just love that Bram wrote. Sadly, it was the last story he wrote, and he was on his last legs. He had suffered a stroke. Mm-hmm. He had lost vision in an eye. And from his son's notes in the Trinity College library in the archives, he wrote this story as a favor to his publisher to give yet one more supernatural novel before Bram left the earth as we know it. Mm-hmm. And that's why The Lair of the White Worm is probably not his best effort, but it's got a very cool supernatural presence. And Chris was able to fill me in on how that worked into Irish folklore and mythology. And it's obvious that that's where Bram got it. So we decided to merge these ideas together because it fit just fine. And we're not going to tell you, and I'm sure Chris won't either,
Sure.
exactly how it happens. But these elements, and Chris does need to tell you about the white worm, they're all what Bram was thinking about and had written about in his notes in the typescript. We're just reimagining them a little bit, as you said, Tim, to make it all kind of a logical whole and to continue the story in a way that two modern creatives will continue his legacy.
Chris, let me ask you this. I have a feeling that even through the mists of time, you were able to, having had things in common with Bram, that you were kind of able to get into his head a little bit and figure out what exactly he was trying to communicate. There had to have been certain things in common, being Masonic brothers, that you knew were there, that you could kind of get the gist of what it was he was trying to communicate through in that last book. Could you take some of that source material, and I take it you did take some of that source material and use it to craft a new ending? Is it safe to say that that's what happened with this project?
We'll probably more likely say it's a new beginning. I think, every good ending should point to a new beginning. I used some symbols that Bram used. There, the white worm actually has some striking Masonic phrases in it. It's a book. There's reasons for some of the things we construct in the Stokerverse. There are pointers and little marks to the occult, because it has to be remembered that Bram was again allegedly a member of the Golden Dawn. We don't have the books. There were no books kept, membership books kept. It was held at the Morton Master Mason Hall in London. It was a very sort of select group of people, and there was an outer temple and an inner temple, and it was we don't know really what went on. We have a vague understanding of Golden Dawn rituals because they've been brought out by people like Israel Regardie and guys like that. What Dacre and I are trying to do is to imbue that and Bram's understanding of spirituality. We believe Bram's understanding of spirituality, because it underpins a lot of his work is from that, especially Dracula. I mean, you see the pagan and then you see the Christian. You see it with the white worm. So the white worm is an Irish mythical figure called Crom. I was generally an ancient fertility deity, and then encountered St. Patrick and was banished. This is really the origin of the serpents being banished from Ireland. It's Crom. Crom gets banished, and there was links to animal or human sacrifice. So it's the full title. I think it's Crom Cruash. My Irish pronunciation is terrible. And my old schoolmasters would be slapping me around the head now going, no! But the translation is crooked. It means crooked and bloody. And then actually in one interpretation, Crom is the mother of Satan itself. Okay. And there's linkages to Dracula and the devil. And this is why this is, we term this as quite authentic to bring these books together. So yeah, it was a fascinating process to sit with Dacre and say, okay, we've got this idea. We're going to bring cosmic horror into Dracula. And for a lot of people, that's the bridge. It's like, okay, well, how are you bringing cosmic horror into Dracula? Well, number one, Bram wrote stories of cosmic horror. We have Jewel of Seven Stars, which is a cosmic horror story.
Yeah.
When we actually bring those characters, Dacre and I wrote a prequel last year. Those the Jewel of Seven Stars also features in our RPG, and we are now tying those three core stories together in one narrative. Trying not to give too much away,
right.
But it's very congruent to what if you're a Bram Stoker scholar, or if you're somebody who's into Dracula or into Bram's sense of horror. It's there. The ties are there. Once the comic gets released and has been out for a month or two, we can actually sit and do a dissection of this and go through the panels, and we'd be quite happy to do that. In fact, we might even do that whenever we're at the convention. We might do some of that. Might have to twist Shane's arm, but that would be quite cool to actually do that. But yeah, I mean, going back to Crom was a solar deity as well. So there's a statue that we have he's depicted as representing the sun, and then surrounded by the signs of the zodiac. Okay, and in spirituality, if you think of Christ, there's Christ and the 12 disciples, and you have the signs of the zodiac. The 13 is a very important number.
Yep.
United States Great Seal, you have 13 arrows held in one of the eagle's claws, and you have also 13 laurel leaves. Above the head of the Great Seal is 13 stars that are arranged in a particular Pythagorean construct. 13 is very powerful. So we are tapping into all these sort of like occult symbology that Bram would have known about.
Right. Yeah.
And that's part of the authentic vision that we have of the Stokerverse as well.
Which is amazing. Because I wrote something down before our interview today, and something that I noticed about Bram that I think the two of you will agree with, and it's this: stories are written for the ages, but have a lesson for the current day. And I think when you think of Bram's writings, especially with Dracula, the story is a story for the ages, yet I think it had a meaning for the current day. And I think especially when you're talking about the White Worm, a story for the ages, but a meaning for the current day. It had an effect for his current spirituality, but also a meaning for the ages. Okay, so you're talking about I guess a search for spirituality in there, and a search for something deeper, but at the same time, searching for something in the immediate. Am I wrong about that?
No, let me jump on this one, because
go ahead.
You both of you speaking, and then Tim, the way you sort of summed it there, brought great satisfaction to my heart. One of my favorite quotes from the novel that is when somebody ever says, "Dacre, what did he mean by this whole story?" You gave me half an opening, Tim, because the quote is, "There are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part." Right. I mean, that's an entree for a paranormal show if ever I heard one. This is Bram saying, and this is, again, you guys have to put this in perspective to when he said it. End of the 1800s, early 1900s, the whole concept of discovering what lies beyond, and Chris can go into detail, what is above is below, all these things, Freemasonry, this desire to search for greater meaning, greater being, this somewhat of a disconnect with very strict religion. People were looking into secret societies because they were free thinkers and looking at things that science couldn't explain at the moment. Science was busting. This is, Charles Darwin, 1859, Origin of the Species. Bram Stoker had three brothers who became, and my great-grandfather was one of them, famous doctors, inventing all kinds of interesting things. But they weren't able to solve, what happens to the body after
Right.
Life as we know it ends.
Yeah.
There are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. We are still trying to figure these things out. So Bram was telling us something here and now, which was very relevant, but he was also saying, keep an open mind, because we may not know what a vampire is to this day, but we know there's something going on, and we may not explain it with modern science, but boy, someday we might.
Yeah.
So, Tim, I thank you for giving me this opening to say that, but it was almost like we scripted it and we're all on the same page. And that's how Chris and I work so well together, is with the backgrounds and our understanding of Bram and his family members at the time, his other contemporaries like Darwin, like Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, who were friends and contemporaries of Bram's, who shared interest into spirituality. And then some of them, it came out in different ways. In Bram, it came out in some of these novels that we're talking about.
Exactly. I'm glad you jumped in there, Dacre, and grabbed that ring there, because that's exactly what I was hitting at as well. Chris, so let me throw this and intertwine this in a little bit here. So we go from the storylines from the comic, the storylines from that we were grabbing from Bram and intertwining into the comic and the graphic novel. So how does that extend then into the RPG? Let's move into the RPG and the tabletop games and into the other products of the Stokerverse here. Does this storyline then extend into the RPG, or is it kind of just a setup to take a storyline further the way that you want to take it?
No, everything's got a congruent timeline, an intended congruent timeline. So if I can take you through it, we've got Dracula's Bedlam, which was a mixed media novel. So it was part prose, part graphic novel. Okay. And that takes place within the asylum, within Dr. Sewer's asylum. So Dacre, myself, and famed Doctor Who writer John Peel, we took sort of a look at the asylum. All we see really in Dracula is Renfield in the asylum and that kind of interaction. But of course, there were other cells and there were other things going on. So we extrapolate that out and then play out the events of Dracula through that. We also show Renfield meeting Dracula for the first time and what that means. And we get deep into Renfield's psyche. What I will say about that story is that in Dracula, Renfield met a permissive father figure and a permissive God. And that's why he became entranced by Dracula. And that's part of the power of Dracula. He can get in there. He can, he can manipulate you. And then we have Voices for Dracula as well, which was an audio drama. Okay. And Dacre and I when we wrote that, we were really lucky. I mean, we got Hollywood celebrities like Simon Templeman. We've got Claudia Christian in there from Babylon 5, a host of Doctor Who actors, including Colin Baker, the Sixth Doctor. And we went into the minds of the characters at very specific points in the novel, but we started to extrapolate that out. So, for example, we've got a bit of a reasoning for why Dracula wanted Carfax, which ties into Jewel of Seven Stars, what's found there in Carfax. And Claudia plays a thief from a particular guild who is sent out by a mysterious organisation that have an Ouroboros tattoo in their hand to go and get that before Dracula does, unfortunately. She encounters Dracula before she can retrieve the object. And we go into then the method of why is there this enmity between Van Helsing and Dracula?
Okay.
So we go into that.
All right.
And we look at then Mina. How did Mina feel while she was being defiled by Dracula? Mm-hmm. And you look at Mina. Mina's seen as she's extremely intelligent, but she's also innocent, and she's almost like the Madonna in that way.
Okay.
When Dracula defiles her, it's a defiling the Virgin Mary in a way. In that field, her mouth's covered with blood and pus. His body's dead. Her mouth is clamped onto dead flesh.
Wow.
So I remember when I talked through with the actress Jessica Martin, and it was like 3:00 in the morning my time. We were talking this through, and I said, "Are you okay with this?" And she said, "Chris, This is absolutely authentic. This is brilliant. Let's do it. So we're showing that central theme's actually the heart. It takes away the erotic element, and really puts in that sort of horrific element of Dracula. And then we have Simon Templeman as Dracula, and then he starts to explain his grand plan. And then we have what Dracula was doing in London, because he wasn't going for a booty call. And we have Claudia's character then picking that up with the nobility of London. Then we have our comic book that we're doing now, our graphic novel.
Yep.
Our quick start RPG is set after that. And players will be in the quick start, which is out now. You can play as some of the hero characters. And then we're going to have a continuation of that. And we have a video game coming out, which sort of a little bit, we've got a prologue which tells the story of how Harker escapes the castle.
Okay.
Because that really hasn't been shown. And then we go into the descendants of the heroes from 1911 onwards. And we deal with Carmilla and the vampire courts. And this culmination of what Dracula really has been doing, what he's been trying to do within England and within Europe. And we see that. And then we're going to take it on even further in the next few years. So there's a plan and a timeline.
Okay.
So that all the fans of Dracula, you pick up each product and it's going to be an individual product and you can enjoy it from beginning to end. But if you follow the Stokerverse, you will get this timeline and you will get this overall narrative that goes into Dracula's past and then into the future, into we're looking at World War II at the minute. So we've got to that. So
really a rich tapestry throughout time of what has gone on with him since we last left him.
Yeah, I mean, that's important. Rather than just giving a few products with some cool ideas, it had to be more than that. I mean, when we're titling something the Stokerverse, it's got to be a verse, it's got to be a universe, and it has to be authentic. It's got to hit all the beats. Yeah. And so far, from the products we've released, the fans have really enjoyed them. You know, and like we've been really lucky, as I've mentioned. We've had stellar people involved that wanted to be involved in this. I mean, when Dacre and I came up with this idea, you always get the fear that, well, how's this going to be received? It's very ambitious. Tom McFarlane said that what we were doing was basically building Marvel in a night, that it was so ambitious, the scope of it. But we've had, like John Peel, for example, who's been one of my heroes when I was a kid. John Peel was mentored by the guy who created the Daleks, Terry Nation. Mm-hmm. And he was the only author who was given the nod by Terry Nation to continue on the Dalek stories. That's and I think he's written 210 books now, and he's done James Bond, and he's done all sorts of franchises, Star Trek, Stargate. And initially it was like, he said, so what are you doing with Dracula? And I told him, and he went, okay, man. Yeah. So we attracted him. We've obviously got Clint Langley, and we've all our partners within gaming are well recognized, and we've got a miniature game coming out, and having Clint Langley and all the other artists involved. So at every point we have had, interest with titans in the field, and a lot of success. So it's been very uplifting.
Well, I tell you, Chris, you may have had Todd McFarlane say that you trying to rebuild Marvel here, or trying to build a Marvel in a day, but you've got one of the richest characters in the history of literature that you're building with. And it seems to me like people have picked up this character, dropped it in the middle of a scenario for what may be a couple of hours of one story, then picked it back up and thrown it to the side again. And then they pick it back up. It's like picking up a toy, playing with it for a couple of hours and throwing it to the side. And we'll just come back and retell the tale over and over and over again, with the idea that, other than what the two of you have done, they don't really seem to have an interest of wanting to build upon the character.
Well, that, if I may say, that's the key difference in what our plans are for the Stokerverse, is that we have this what we bring to the table is essentially a timeline of connected stories with a public domain character that somebody else could have done bits and pieces with, but we're adding all this value. Number one, I've got access to all the notes and the typescript and these other things that Bram used to put into this, but without Chris's genius to say, hey, let's do something in this world, an RPG. So he makes the connection with a company, do an RPG. A tabletop goes to Crooked Dice, goes to these different companies, and they've got faith, and luckily they do from the very beginning, to say, okay, we're happy with the plans you've got, and all these little pieces along the way are beginning to grow, and everybody who has jumped in with us at the beginning are seeing each of them grow just a little bit. That is our style. We could have given this idea away at the beginning to someone else, and and maybe taken some money and run somewhere with it. But that's not our plan, and we would have totally lost control, and that would have not had the impact and been able to be true to Bram Stoker, because we are the creative consultants behind the whole thing. Some things Chris does the actual work, some things Dacre does the work, sometimes we advise other people on the work, but the bottom line is we have sort of control over the entirety of the project, and that's what brings true value to it.
Dacre, if I'm being too personal here, to tell me, just to kind of move on, this has kind of been sticking in my craw since I heard you on with our good friend Alan Moore and our friends over at House of Mystery Radio. You've said multiple times that Dracula is a public domain character. Can you explain to me how that happened?
Yeah, it's very simple. 50 years after the author died, he goes into public domain, and that's that happens country by country. And since he wrote this thing and it was published in England 50 years after Bram died, so 1962, it's public domain. That means anybody can write a Dracula story and not have to pay Bram's direct descendants. I'm not even a direct descendant. My cousins are, and I represent them in helping organize and get them deals with the Bram Stoker estate, but they still don't have to pay the cousins anything because it's public domain. But what Dacre and Chris bring is more insight into the writing process, the research process. We then create stories that have come out of Bram's research and writing. That's not public domain. Right, that's right. Stoker and McAuley are creating these extra stories that contribute to this. But if you, Tim, wanted to write a story about Dracula, sure, you could do that. If Bram Stoker, it was the author of that, but it's gone now as far as payment to somebody for those rights. We, though, when we create a story and use some of those public domain characters, but we change those characters ourselves and we put them into a story, that becomes part of the Stokerverse. And then then we have the rights to put that into a comic, into a game, into a figure, something like that.
Okay, fair enough. I guess, we hear about, the only thing we can relate it to is music, and how, you've got rights for, I think it's up to a publishing catalog of up to 100 years if you don't sell the rights off first. And even then it goes into the public domain. And even then you could hand off, or you could will it to another relative. They could maintain the estate. So when I think of like music publishing rights, to me, it would just seem like somebody would have handed that down from generation to generation. It would have been kept within the Stoker family.
You can't, after 50 years, you can't. That's it.
That seems like such a shame.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll move on
we're creating original content based on some of those things.
Yeah.
We're creating original content from the story. As Chris said, how did Jonathan Harker escape from the castle? What happened? Where did the fourth bride come from?
Yeah.
What really happened when Jonathan Harker was making his way and was saved in Munich? When he went into the hospital. So it's these sideline stories. We also think of, hey, there's all kinds of other little things we could deal with. What was it like with Lucy walking around London, which was just inferred in the story, but we've got audio story that goes into great depth in that. We can do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Dacre, you were on a tour of the UK recently, and there's been plenty of, I shouldn't say plenty, but there's been quite a few celebrations for this 125th year anniversary. We still have a little under a half year to go here with the 125th year celebration. I know I mentioned that you're going to be out at Michigan Paracon. I know we have quite a few people who listen to this show who are going to be out at Michigan Paracon. I take it there's still more celebrations to come, coming up in this half year, yes?
Yeah, I mean, just because May 26th was the actual publishing date of Dracula, 1897, I was in Whitby, England, where Bram took a holiday there and set 3 chapters there. I was in Cruden Bay, Scotland, actually on May 26th, where I had a plaque unveiled on the side of the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel where Bram actually stayed when he was writing the novel while he was in Cruden Bay. And that was a fun tour. Okay, so what are the plans that are left to go? Because yes, it cranks back up again in August when I go to Dark History Convention in Champaign, Illinois. I go Michigan Paracon. Mm-hmm. I'm going out to California, to Alameda. My friend Connie Garcia runs a menagerie, Oddities Menagerie, and we're going to be moving to a couple of different cities out on the West Coast. What I generally do at these places, Tim, is I give this audio-visual presentation called Stoker on Stoker, the mysteries behind the research and the writing of Dracula. Obviously, in the 125th, I add a little more things to it. I go into detail about some of the stuff you're talking to me and Chris about, how we're keeping the legacy alive. But mostly it's all the things that I've researched over the past 12 to 15 years. What have I found that's really interesting? As Chris said, I found this really cool connection between Bram Stoker and the books that he looked at and the devil. These things have brought interesting ideas to light. So I share those with people in my lectures. I'm going to be in Ireland during the Halloween weekend, the Bram Stoker Festival that will be in Ireland. I just can't remember. I have my daytimer with me, Tim. I know Chris is going to be in Ireland himself at that time. And then, of course, as we said at the top of the show, we're both going to be in Birmingham at the International Comic Expo, along with Shane Chesby of the Scratch productions, with the new comic. And there will probably be other things I'll be announcing on my Facebook page and, on dacrestoker.com. Chris has he's got a Facebook page, Stoker McAuley Productions on Facebook, where we announce all the things that we're going to be doing, how to meet the public, how to let people come and, get things signed and all that cool stuff.
Okay, and we'll have a link for that Facebook page on the description of the show. I do want to know, is there a way that people can, or will it be on the Facebook page that people can support the movement somehow? Can they buy merchandise? Can they, do you have 125th anniversary merchandise that they can purchase? Anything like that?
Well, thank you. I'll send you the link too for bramstokerestate.com. And my wife and I manage this for our cousins. Bram actually has 2 great grandsons who are still alive. They're just not really into all this stuff like we are. Okay. So they've given my wife and I sort of free reign to do some merchandising promotion. And we've got Bram Stoker bobbleheads. I got this really cool tie that I have actually created with some old first edition books of Dracula. I've got these cool 125th anniversary pens. I got posters, all kinds of good stuff at bramstokerestate.com signature shop. So that I'll send you that link as well, Tim. Okay. But thank you for asking.
Sure. And can we maybe possibly look for a day where we could walk into maybe our local comic store and see the comic on shelves?
Chris, you can talk to that because I know you've been chatting with Shane about U.S. distribution of Dracula Return, Cult of the White Worm. So what do you know about that?
Yes, it will be happening. Yeah. Absolutely. It may take a little time. When we're doing our crowdfunding for this, obviously people who are involved in the crowdfunding, they get the comic first.
Okay. They
get the comic with all bells and whistles first. Then we're going to be selling it at ICE and signing it at ICE, and then it'll be hitting the markets. It'll be hitting retail.
So it'll be at the Birmingham Ice Convention first, and then after that, you're looking at potential distribution to comic shops.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Quickest way to get it is once we go onto the crowdfunding platform. Quickest way to do that then is just to pledge.
Right.
You'll be assured, if we hit our targets, you'll be assured of getting that comic within a month. It's quite quick. It's within a month or 6 weeks.
That sounds great. Okay. Well, like I said, we'll have links in the description of this program to get a hold of that, and I'm looking forward to getting a hold of a copy as well. I'm incredibly interested in checking this out. I'm excited too, guys. You know, to see the original interpretation of Dracula and see it right there on the page, and to see just the way it was meant to be, and have it there in full color. I think it's just exciting. It's just exciting. And especially that it's being remembered on the 125th anniversary, I think is just a tip of the cap to both of you, that you guys are putting forth the effort, and really a monumental effort between the two of you, between the comic, the RPG, the tabletop games, the video game. I mean, it's just a monumental effort between the two of you. And again, I tip my cap to both of you.
Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate your time having us on the show. Always a pleasure to chat. And with my buddy Chris, who, we live in different countries, but we spend a heck of a lot of time on Zoom and on telephones together. So great, all three of us getting together on this.
And Chris, where do we flood you with birthday cards? We got to know that.
Well, I've got a website, dark-universes.com, and that sort of includes everything that I'm doing. So from Terminator stuff, the James Bond stuff, the sci-fi stuff that I'm doing with Claudia Christian. We run a franchise as well together now. And Stoker stuff, it's all there. So if you go there, you'll see lots of stuff about the work that I do.
All right. Well, then we're putting that up on there too. We're going to put a link to your website up there in the description of the program, and people can just buzz by and give you a happy birthday, because, man, I know what it's like to work on your birthday. It's not the most favorable thing to do, but we appreciate you for doing it, my friend.
When you work in the video game industry, there's no such thing as time off.
That's true. It's the same in media too. It's the same deal. But we do what we love, so it's a mixed blessing. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, folks, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week for a great week of shows. We had a great week of shows this week, and we're going to do it again next week. I want to thank our sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp is there for you when you need a licensed therapist, when you're going through some tough times in your life. If life has thrown you a curveball and you need somebody to help talk you through it, BetterHelp is there with a licensed therapist within 48 hours to help you through the issues that you're going through at that time. It's real simple. You just get 10% off your first month by going to betterhelp.com/darknessradio. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/darknessradio. And they can help you through those curveballs that are being thrown at you at this time. Folks, take care of yourself and each other. Do a good deed for that person out there that you just see out there on the street that maybe needs a hand up. We need to do that a little bit more in this life. Things are growing a little bit colder each and every day, and if we take just 5 minutes to help somebody in need, we can turn it around. We can make it a little bit better life out there for each other. Do it for your buddy Timmy, and I'll do that definitely for somebody that I see this weekend. We can do it for each other, and we can make it a little bit better world. In the meantime, I'll see you on Tuesday for True Crime Tuesday. You've been listening to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.